Everything has been leading up to this. Your protag has set their goal, tried and failed, struggled to survive, and now it's finally time to see if they find success. We are at the absolute peak of your story, a moment we call the story climax. And in this lesson, we're breaking apart the story climax to understand what it is, how to make sure it works, and one simple trick to create an ending that will keep the audience on the edge of their seats. This video is a lesson from a full free mega course on our website. If you're ready to supercharge your storytelling, click the link in the description and start your journey today. This video is also part of a series, so if you haven't watched the previous videos, there are links down below. This is it, the biggest moment of your story, the story climax. We call it the story climax because the word climax on its own can describe the height of scenes, acts, and more. But this is the biggest one because it's the peak of your whole story. The story climax is the 14th step of USL and is a moment, meaning it usually happens in one scene and one location. This is the obligatory scene we mentioned a while ago, and it is the end point of the goal. Here, your protag will face the antagonistic forces to determine once and for all if they can achieve their goal. In our lesson on the catalyst, we mentioned that moment implies an obligatory scene. This is basically the scene that absolutely needs to happen for the story to end, and it's the image your audience pictures as the endpoint when they hear your catalyst. For example, the catalyst in The Silence of the Lambs is when protag Clarice is asked to help catch serial killer Buffalo Bill. So, the obligatory scene, or the image the audience pictures as the endpoint, will obviously be Clarice catching Buffalo Bill. The story climax is almost always this obligatory scene, whether that's a profession of love in romance stories or the protag killing the monster in a horror story. It is also the endpoint of the goal. Your protag commits to a goal in the outer gateway, and that goal is either achieved or failed in the story climax. Because of this, the story climax must fit within the bounds of the goal. If the goal is winning a sports competition, the story climax can't be the protag fighting a monster. This is limiting, but also super helpful, because when you determine what your goal is, you should immediately know your story climax, or vice versa. This brings us to an important concept we need to emphasize. In our lesson on the goal, we mentioned the success of the goal needs to be as binary as possible. In other words, the protag will either succeed or fail. That's why competition movies are so popular. You either win or lose. It's yes or no. And this has a huge effect on your story climax. We should be able to picture what success and failure look like, so as soon as either happens, we know if the protag has achieved their goal or not. This is the key to mastering this moment, because the more specific, tangible, and binary your goal is, the easier it is to measure your protag's success. And by the end of this moment, we should clearly see whether they achieved the goal or failed. Also, the protag is almost always alone in the story climax, and if they aren't, they need to be the one to make the most critical move. After all, that's why they are the protag. This is why in the Lego movie, despite having many allies, protag Emmett faces Lord Business alone. And if you mess this up, it can completely ruin your story. This was the downfall of Gunpowder Milkshake, which had the protag run away during the story climax instead of facing the antag, ending an overall fantastic story with a lackluster note. Make sure your story climax is the best scene of your story, and make sure your protag pulls the proverbial trigger. If you have an example of a story that completely nailed or completely failed its story climax, comment it down below. Finally, let's cover a way to spice up your story climax and keep your audience hooked. It's a concept we call the climax twist, and you can find it everywhere. It's simple. Just when your protag thinks they've won, the antag surprises them with a huge twist. A perfect example of this is in The Hunger Games, when the game makers announce there can only be one winner, forcing Katniss and Peeta against each other. Just when Katniss thought it was over, this huge twist changes everything. But this not only surprises your audience, it also lets your protag prove their change. The response to the climax twist will almost always showcase the need, letting you hammer home the lesson of your story. In The Hunger Games, Katniss and Peeta decide to eat poisonous berries so there won't be a survivor. This forces the game makers to declare them both winners, and it also showcases Katniss's need of standing up to the Capitol. So, to pull off a climax twist, first start by having the protag seemingly achieve their goal. Next, have the antag or antagonistic forces throw a curveball that takes away this victory. Then, have your protag use their need to reclaim their goal, ultimately leaving them successful. And if you want, throw in more than one climax twist. This is pulled off perfectly in Scream, with 3 obvious climax twists, the third of which is made self-aware as a trope of the horror genre. You should now have a strong grasp on the story climax, including what it is, how important the goal is in its success, and using climax twists to add surprises and prove the protag's change. But if you really want to become the master of the story climax, the extended version of this lesson covers how to make the protag succeed by failing, a trick to fusing the story climax with the inner gateway, and covers the story climax in action with an in-depth example of the 1979 sci-fi horror flick, Alien. See you there.